Chapter 1106. Pei Chi responded with an "oh" and followed him like she was in a fog. Should we take the stairs or the elevator? He didn't forget her claustrophobia and asked her. Pei Chi blurted out, more than 10 floors. Let's forget about it. She didn't think much of it after she said it, but Tang Yu smiled meaningfully. Xia City existed in the depths of Chi-Chi's memory. When they got to the elevator, she hugged his arm. The little sheep was so scared. Tang Yu held the bag in one hand and held her shoulder with the other. He said in a low voice, "Are you sure you don't want to do it?" She was a little scared at first, but now she was amused by him. She buried her face in his shoulder and said, "Yeah, I don't want to do it." She admitted that she thought about it. She didn't have sex in her memory. She didn't have sex with Anlin, but it didn't mean that she didn't have fantasies. She liked the man in front of her, but she didn't want to destroy this desire. Sometimes, it wasn't good to have something, and all that was left was emptiness. Tang Yu just smiled, walked out of the elevator and opened the door to the apartment. After they made up, they rarely came here, but there was always someone to clean the place. It was still the same. There was a daisy in a vase on the dining table, and there were water droplets on it. Pei Chi went in and looked around. She turned to look at Tang Yu and said, "I like it here." He made a sound of agreement, and his face was a little deep, as if he was reminiscing. After a while, he said softly, "Xiaoxin's mother used to live here." Pei Chi's heart ached. She looked up at him and said, "Xiaoxin's mother?" Tang Yu nodded. "Yes, Xiaoxin's mother." "What happened to her?" Pei Chi didn't know why she asked, but she couldn't help asking. Tang Yu looked at her and smiled. "Pei Chi, do you want to know?" She nodded. It's not good to know too much about a man. His voice was low and husky. It's dangerous. Pei Chi didn't dare to ask any more when she thought of the deal. At this moment, the doorbell rang. Tang Yu walked over. It was a salesperson from a certain shopping mall who had delivered the clothes they had bought. Tang Yu asked them to hang up the clothes in the changing room. Pei Chi went over to talk to him, only to find that the pile of damn things, the black lace, had all been sent over. She puffed up her cheeks. "I'm not wearing it." "I'll wear it." Tang Yu sent off the service staff, turned around, and looked at Pei Chi with a faint smile. Her eyes were watery, which made her look even more alluring. "All right. Go take a shower and go to bed. There are bathrobes and towels in the cabinet." He ruffled her hair. "You're tired, too." The homeless little guy must be tired after wandering outside for a whole day. The way he looked at her was full of love, and Pei Chi was a little dazed. "Pei Chi, if you keep looking at me like that, I'll think that you can't bear for me to leave." His voice was especially deep and alluring in the dark night. She didn't speak, but just looked up at him. Actually, she couldn't bear for him to leave. She just looked at him like that. He smiled and caressed her rosy red lips with his fingers. He lowered his head slightly. "Do you still want to call me brother?" She sprang up at once, like a rabbit. Unfortunately, she hit his chin. Chapter 1107. After staring at her for 2 seconds, he suddenly pulled her hair and let her lean against his chest. His handsome face leaned down and lightly kissed her little mouth. It was very gentle and there was a kind of leisurely taste to it, but his body did not express it like this. His body was very tense, as though it was about to explode. He kissed her lightly and said in a low voice, "I'll stay, okay?" Pei Chi's little hands tugged at his shirt and rubbed against it. Tang Yu restrained himself and let go of her. He patted her little butt and said in a low voice, "Hurry up and take a shower." He didn't say that he would stay, but he didn't say that he wouldn't stay either. Pei Chi just felt that she couldn't stay with him anymore. She ran to the bathroom. After taking a shower, she weakly realized that she hadn't taken her bathrobe. Hence, Pei Chi meowed like a kitten in the bathroom. Tang Yu. Tang Yu stood by the window and was smoking a cigarette. When he heard her calling him, he turned his head and smiled. What's the matter? Half of her little face peeked out from behind the door and she meowed like a kitten. I didn't take my bathrobe. His hand that was holding the cigarette trembled and he walked to the changing room to get her a bathrobe and underwear. Pei Chi took the bathrobe and put it on. Her long hair was wet and she was blowing her hair in front of the window. Her bathrobe was rolled up and her slender legs were fair and straight. His eyes seemed to be on fire. The cigarette but shook and he said in a low voice, I'm going to take a shower. Pei Chi turned her head. You're staying. Her long hair was still wet and draped over her shoulders. The thin bathrobe couldn't hide anything. It was alluring no matter how one looked at it. Tang Yu walked over and was very close to her. He lowered his head and looked at her. Pei Chi, we've only met 4 times. For you to appear in front of me like this means that you like me. With that, he kissed her lightly on the lips and went to the bathroom. Pei Chi was left standing there, not knowing what to do. She liked him. She shook her head violently. Of course not. It was because he was homeless. Pei Chi was lying to herself. She obviously had designs on him, on his body. Pei Chi blew her hair so hard that it was straight and dry. When Tang Yu came out, she had brewed fruit tea and poured 2 cups on the table in front of the sofa. She had fallen asleep on the sofa. He smiled. He really looked like a child, drooling at such a big age. However, he still drank her fruit tea. It was sweet and sour, and tasted just like the ones she used to make. He carried her to the master bedroom and adjusted the air conditioner to a comfortable temperature. He lowered his head and kissed her smooth forehead. He said goodnight in a low voice and walked out. He needed a cigarette to calm down his overflowing desire. He knew that if he wanted it, she would be his tonight, because she wanted him too. But he didn't want her to fall in love with him so soon. In the dark night, he stood by the window and smoked quietly. However, he was no longer lonely. In the bedroom, Pei Chi quietly opened her eyes, leaving just like that. Just a kiss on the forehead and he left. She rolled on the bed. Shen Yin moaned. Ouch! Lying flat on his back, he reached out his hand and touched his forehead and his lips. She could feel that he was restraining himself, but what was he waiting for? Why was he restraining himself? Pei Chi was horrified to find that she actually wanted to sleep with Tang Yu. She hugged the quilt and rolled around, moaning. When Tang Yu returned to the bedroom, it was already 11:30. He thought she was asleep. Chapter 1108. Hugging her in his arms, he stared at her beautiful face under the dim light. His Chi remembered him from her body to her heart. Otherwise, why wasn't she lying on the same bed with someone else? At this moment, his heart was racing and he really wanted her. However, he restrained himself and just kissed her and closed his eyes. After a while, he smiled and patted the person in his arms. Pei Chi, if you really want it, I can cooperate. Her face was red and she bit her lip. I don't want it. She had been pretending to be asleep, but her stiff body couldn't fool him. If not, go to sleep. He pulled her into his arms. Kids shouldn't think too much. I'm not thinking too much, she muttered. You're the one who's sleeping on the same bed with me. She kicked him in the foot in a petulant way. Tang Yu chuckled. There's only one bed here. Otherwise, where would you let me sleep? As he said that, he turned over and pressed her down. Sleep here. Get down. Pei Chi was anxious and she hit him with her little hand. Get down. He didn't make things difficult for her. He turned over and lay flat. Don't worry, I won't touch you. He paused for a moment before looking at her. There'll be a storm after midnight. Her eyes widened. All right, let's sleep. The corner of his mouth turned up. I'm not that desperate. Pei Chi was humiliated. She kicked him and turned her back to sleep. He didn't carry her and just lay flat on his back, wearing only a bathrobe. At this moment, everything was perfect. She was by his side. After midnight, there was indeed a storm and the weather was hot and humid. Even with the air conditioner in the room, they could feel the heat. Pei Chi tossed and turned. Because he was beside her, she couldn't fall asleep. In the end, she hugged his arm without a backbone. It seemed to be much better this way. She fell into a deep sleep with satisfaction. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at the pig-like child. He smiled slightly. Dawn. The sky was clear. The morning light penetrated through the curtains and gently shone on the luxurious bed. Pei Chi blanket was kicked up to her waist. Her small hand was placed flat on Tang Yu's smooth abdomen, and the other hand was placed on an indescribable place. Her little face was calm, and her face was pressed against his chest. Her long black hair was scattered, and she looked indescribably beautiful. This scene was peaceful and beautiful. When Tang Yu woke up, he lifted his body slightly to take a look. Then, he smiled and continued to lie flat. Although it was hard to bear, this kind of torture was also sweet. It wasn't until 8:00 that Pei Chi woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw a white bathrobe with her saliva on it. Is she drooling? Anlin. Why am I sleeping in your bed? She asked in a daze, and then hugged his waist with her little hands. Why are you still in bed today? Anlin. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes, wishing he could strangle her to death. She was on his bed, calling out Qin Anlin's name. Although he knew that nothing had happened between them, he could tell from her words that she and Anlin had a good relationship. At least, there were feelings. That was why she was so natural, and why she was not guarded against Qin Anlin. At that moment, Tang Yu's heart was in turmoil, but he quietly lowered his head and kissed her. It's me, Tang Yu. Mrs. Qin. The last 3 words were uttered through gritted teeth. Pei Chi was so shocked that she almost jumped up. Mrs. Qin. Chapter 1109. He held her waist with his big hands and didn't let her get up. He said mockingly, I'm honored to be able to satisfy you, Mrs. Qin. With that, he kissed her deeply. The kind of kiss that made her toes curl up. Pei Chi was a little scared. While she was a little dazed, he suddenly let go of her and got up to take a shower. Pei Chi saw him soar to the sky. He turned around and glared at her, and then went to the bathroom. Pei Chi hugged the quilt and lay down again. She looked up at the ceiling and murmured, he must be going through menopause. Pei Chi, I heard it. His gritted teeth came from the bathroom. Oh. She buried her face. She didn't know why she felt so comfortable here. Why wasn't she guarded against this man at all? It was as if it was normal to be by his side. Maybe it was because his body was very attractive. Pei Chi smiled silently and picked up her phone to open it. There were countless missed calls, all from Qin Anlin. She thought about it and called him. At least, she told him that she was safe and didn't let him worry. Qin Anlin's voice was a little cold. He probably guessed who she was with. Chi, do you have to do this? Pei Chi paused for a moment and then said slowly, Anlin, I'm not with him. But I don't hate him. You and Yi Liangqiu have a son. Is our marriage not suitable? If she loved him deeply, if they had a happy marriage, even if he had someone else before, even if they had a son, she still wouldn't let go of his hand easily as long as he loved her. She would give him time to deal with the problem, and she would treat the child well. But she had such an awkward relationship with Anlin. Why didn't she give Yi Liangqiu and the child a chance? Actually, she was more willing to let Anlin be happy. After living with him for 2 years, she really had feelings for him. They were like family. He was more than a friend. He was like a brother to her. No matter what trouble she caused, no matter how willful she was, he would tolerate her. Sometimes, she would also wonder if she should try to love Anlin. She had tried, really, but she was just a little short. The voice in her heart kept telling her that it was not Anlin. She tried to accept it and become a normal married couple with him, but she was still afraid at the crucial moment. The body, perhaps, is the most honest. She didn't know if she had ever been entangled with this man named Tang Yu, but she thought that she must know him, and he must know her. Otherwise, how could they sleep together so defenselessly? She didn't have to worry that he would force himself on her. This peace of mind surpassed what she felt for Anlin. Qin Anlin's voice was cold. I can promise not to be with Yi Liangqiu. Can you promise never to be with Tang Yu? After he finished speaking, he turned around and saw Yi Liangqiu standing behind him. There wasn't much expression on her face. It was just like when she was acting, she was wearing a mask. Qin Anlin was a little annoyed and ignored her. Yi Liangqiu laughed mockingly. Qin Anlin continued to speak coldly into the phone. Chi-Chi, there are problems with our marriage, but we don't need a divorce. I will make good arrangements for Mu Yun. As for the rest, it's not important. Pei Chi-Chi asked him softly, Anlin, are you tired? Chapter 11:10. Anlin, I'm not as heartless as you think. She sighed. It'll be better if we change our way of getting along. Let you go and let you be with Tang Yu. His voice was a little hoarse. Did you two sleep together last night? Pei Chi-Chi was shocked. She and Anlin were husband and wife, but when everything was torn apart, it was so cruel. She could tell him calmly that she didn't care that he had a son, and he could say that she wanted to sleep with someone else in a mocking tone. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little hoarse. Anlin, I can't give you happiness. You're the one who's not willing to give it to me. He sounded a little tired. Chi-Chi, you're against me from the bottom of your heart. It's just like when you went to Dr. York. You've never thought of improving our relationship, have you? Pei Chi-Chi's heart was filled with misery. How could she not know how much he spoiled her? She wanted to love him, but there was nothing she could do. Guilt, sadness, Qin Anlin said, Chi-Chi, go back to New York, okay? Wait for me there. I'll go over after I'm done. If Yi Liangqiu was willing, he could take Mu Yun away with him. Chi-Chi wouldn't mind. They could still live the same life as before. A sexless marriage. He had already given up on the idea of finding a woman to settle things with. That would be unfair to Chi-Chi. As for Pei Chi-Chi, he was extremely upset. However, she wouldn't think that his suggestion was a good idea. It wouldn't be fair to him, and she didn't want to be stuck in it for the rest of her life. One day, she would meet the man she wanted to love. She had to be free. However, she wouldn't force Anlin to divorce. That would be cruel to Anlin. Anlin, time will change everything. She said softly. Don't hurt her. She gave birth to your child and raised him for 7 years. Qin Anlin closed his eyes. Chi-Chi, half a year, I'll give you freedom in this half a year. Tell me your decision in half a year. This was his biggest concession. He knew that the harder he pushed, the further she would run away from him. Just don't let me not see you, he said in a low voice, lowering his posture to the lowest. There was no doubt that Qin Anlin was smart. He had taken a big risk, but his humble attitude had touched the softest part of her heart. Pei Chi slowly put down her phone. Anlin agreed, but she felt sad in her heart. Tang Yu, who was standing at the door of the bathroom, heard it and smiled silently. He knew that his little sheep was soft-hearted again. Qin Anlin's move of advancing by retreating was also brilliant. But he didn't mind. He walked over and smiled. Talking to Anlin. Pei Chi felt a little dizzy when she saw him dressed neatly. If he and Anlin were friends, then sleeping on the same bed with him was a little. Ahem. Although they hadn't really slept together, it wasn't far from it, they had kissed and touched. She replied with a then leaned against the window and looked outside. She murmured, Tang Yu, no matter what my relationship with you was in the past, I don't want to hurt Anlin. She leaned against the window and looked at him. He is very important to me. Tang Yu sighed in his heart. If Pei Chi had said this in the past, it would have been a huge joke. But at this moment, she couldn't be more serious. Chapter 11:11. Thinking that Qin Anlin was his mother-in-law, Tang Yu felt better. He didn't answer her, because his Chi was too smart. If she knew some things too soon, it would put her in a difficult position. Moreover, he was afraid that she would think too much and get a headache. He had contacted her hospital in the United States and found her attending doctor, Dr. George. Her brain couldn't be stimulated too much, so he was willing to take it slow. Qin Anlin could wait, and so could he. Moreover, the person who could sleep with her in his arms was Tang Yu. He didn't say anything and looked at the morning light with her. After a long time, Tang Yu said, "Stay here." He took a business card and put it on the table in front of her. "This is the director of Jiaoren magazine. Call him and he will arrange a job for you. The monthly salary is about 15,000 yuan. Pei Chi looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" "Probably because I want to kiss you." He smiled and bent down to kiss her lips. "I won't force you until you are willing." She was a cloud now. If she didn't want to be caught, then he would let her go. One day, she would come back. He didn't want to have sex with her, but he had some dark thoughts. Once he gave it to her, the game would be over in her heart. She was like a child who got a toy and threw it away. He was her toy now. He couldn't let her get it so quickly. Tang Yu reached out and rubbed her hair. "I'll go first. I have a meeting later." Pei Chi grabbed his arm. Her heart was beating fast. She looked at him for a long time and said softly, "I'll make you some noodles. It's chicken noodles. It's delicious." Tang Yu's eyes darkened. He stared at her motionlessly. She licked her lower lip and looked at him. After a long time, he said, "Okay." He looked at the time. "I have 20 minutes. She flew into the kitchen. "I'll be quick." Tang Yu looked at her back with a faint smile on his face. He watched her in the kitchen, busy as a diligent little bee. The morning light shone on her profile, and it was as beautiful as ever. It was as if she had returned to the past, as if she still remembered everything. Tang Yu's eyes softened, looking at the lost beauty in his life. The reason why he showed mercy to Qin Anlin was that Anlin had never been cruel to her. Secondly, without Anlin, Chi would not be able to stand beside him so well. In the past 2 years, he had to admit that Anlin had done a lot for her. She had developed feelings for Anlin. It was only natural. It was my duty. Tang Yu felt a little bitter in his heart, but he felt warm when he looked at her. Pei Chi placed the noodles in front of him. "Eat. How about trying it?" Her eyes were begging for praise. Tang Yu looked at her. It's your cooking. Of course it's delicious. Pei Chi sat opposite him. She held her hands and said with a smile, I forgot to wash my hands just now. Tang Yu paused for a moment, looking at her with an expression that was hard to say. However, he quickly lowered his head and finished all the noodles in his bowl. That speed was frightening. Pei Chi wiped her lips as she watched him get up. I'm leaving. He smiled and handed her the room card. He took out 20,000 yuan from his wallet. I borrowed it. Can I pay with my body? Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. She already felt that life as a leech was wonderful. Chapter 11-12. I'm talking about shredded chicken noodles, 1,000 yuan a bowl. She smiled. Tang Yu glanced at her and finally rubbed her little head. Okay. She watched him leave and breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, she was afraid that Tang Yu would move forward, afraid that he would tell her what kind of past they had and want her to be with him. She wasn't ready, and her relationship with Anlin was also a mess. She really didn't want to be entangled with him too much. Even if she was about to drool over his body. She should have taken a bite this morning. Pei Chi was annoyed. Why didn't you take a bite secretly? His mermaid lines are so beautiful. After thinking for a while, she made herself some food, changed into a set of clothes and went to the magazine office according to the address. Jiaran magazine had moved once and was now located in a more prosperous area of B City. It was just a street away from the Boyi building, the coordinates of B City. The company had just changed owners and moved the next day. This speed. So when Pei Chi went there, the magazine office was a little messy and a lot of things were not cleaned up. The editor-in-chief had been replaced, and so had all the staff. Except for Old Can and Amy, the others were gone. When Pei Chi came in, Amy and Old Can were sitting together at the messy desk. Amy poked Old Kansas as she really came. Amy was very nervous. She had never acted before. She used to eat in the same pot with Pei Chi, but now she had to pretend that she didn't know her. It was so difficult. Old Can glanced at her. Just treat her as a new employee. By the way, the instructions were, to bully her. Why do you want me to be the bad guy? Amy was quite angry. Old Can smiled, showing his white teeth. My wife doesn't allow me to bully her. Wife. Amy rolled her eyes, but she was also quite envious. Old Can and Pei Huan were really happy. Thinking back to Pei Huan's arrogant look when she first stepped into their magazine office, she couldn't imagine that she would be with Old Can. She poked Old Can again. You can be proud of yourself. Can Mingzhu really felt that this life was very good. The only drawback was that after Chi disappeared, Pei Huan would often be unhappy. Now, she was back. Lao Can passionately felt that their married life could be improved from once a week to 5 times a week. Standing by the door, Pei Chi looked at Amy and Old Can as if she were looking at a real Beauty and the Beast. He coughed lightly and asked, Is this place hiring? Old Can nodded. I'm looking for a photographer. Pei Chi came over. I want to apply for a job. What works do you have? Lao Can asked without batting an eyelid. He knew Pei Chi's level too well. She was brought up by him. He didn't know if she had been neglected in the past 2 years. Works. Pei Chi's camera was with Qin Anlin. How could she have any works with her? But after thinking about it, she immediately smiled. Wait a minute. She picked up her phone and clicked on a certain photo. I took this. It was sent from the camera. Old Can's Adam's apple moved a little when he saw it. His gaze was meaningful. Not bad. Amy was also curious about what kind of photo could make old Can's expression change so much. So she leaned over and was stunned when she saw it. Damn, this speed. She was still suffering from amnesia. They had just come back and met and they were already rolling around together. They were definitely rolling around together. Otherwise, Pei Chi wouldn't have been able to take a naked photo of Tang Yu. Chapter 11-13. It's not bad. Amy swallowed her saliva and enjoyed the view. But in her heart, she thought that Mr. Tang looked noble on the surface, but in private, he was very shameless. Old Can looked at Amy and said, "Amy, find a desk for her." Then he turned to look at Pei Chi and said, "She'll start working today. Her monthly salary is 15,000 yuan, plus an allowance of 2,000 yuan, but she has to adapt to all kinds of overtime." Pei Chi didn't have to be picky. She just wanted to make a living now. She had thought about it. She could pay Tang Yu's money back in 2 months. Then, she would take out another 3,000 yuan to rent his apartment. Although she knew that she might not be able to rent an apartment in that area for 20,000 yuan a month, and the interior was very luxurious. Old Can left soon. After a while, he threw her a magazine. "Look at this. Yi Liangqiu will come to Be City next week. You can interview her then." Yi Liangqiu. Pei Chi felt that God must be joking with her. This was Anlin's mistress, and now she was asked to interview her. If she saw Anlin, it wouldn't be a good scene. She wanted to refuse, but for the sake of 18,000 yuan, she endured it. "Who's the reporter?" "I'll cooperate. There's only one person working here, no partner, unless it's a special need." Old Can had a beard on his face, and when he smiled, his white teeth could be seen. However, Pei Chi felt that he seemed to be gloating. In the end, she took the job. Next week, it was already Friday. By the way, 2 days off every week. Old Can patted her on the shoulder, almost breaking her. "We're a humane society. Do a good job." Pei Chi nodded blankly. People were peeking at her, because she was so beautiful. Old Can clapped his hands, and more than 20 employees stopped. Old Can cleared his throat and said, "A new employee is coming." He tilted his head and asked Pei Chi, "What's her name?" Pei Chi said her name. Old Can smiled again. "Well, you'll be called Xiao Qi from now on." Why was she called Xiao Qi? It felt like a pet name. Pei Xiao Qi was angry, but he did not dare to say anything. Old Can clapped his hands. "Today is Friday. Thank you for your hard work. Let's go to the night bar tonight. It's our treat." There were cheers all around, and one by one, they came over to greet Pei Chi, especially the male employees. Amy sighed inwardly. Pei Chi is a harvesting machine. Don't even think about it. Every piece of clothing she's wearing is worth 5 or 6,000 yuan. That pink diamond might be low-key for her, but it's still worth more than 10 million yuan. Amy also wanted to go over and give Pei Chi a big hug and a kiss, but she didn't dare to do so. She really wanted to die. However, her words were harsh. "You have to pay attention to your image. Don't talk about personal matters during working hours." Pei Chi immediately came over with a smile and hugged Amy's arm. "Sister Amy, I understand. Please guide me more in the future." Amy was thoroughly annoyed. She felt like she was looking at the old Pei Huan. Did Pei Huan and Pei Chi exchange souls? Looking at Amy's expression, Pei Chi pursed her lips and smiled secretly. "I'll hate you to death. Show me who's boss." It took Amy a long time to come back to her senses. She snorted. "I'm only 20. Pei Chi was still smiling. Then I'll take good care of you from now on and treat you like a little sister. She reached out and stroked Amy's hair as if she were a pet. Amy froze again. Chapter 11:14. Amy froze again. She felt that she had been tricked by Pei Chi-Chi. What silly girl. Bah, Pei Chi-Chi was still as bad as ever. She was still so black-bellied. Old Can nudged Amy. Xiao-Chi just arrived. Don't bully her. Amy rolled her eyes. Wasn't it for acting? Wasn't it to let Pei Chi-Chi relive her old dreams? Otherwise, she wouldn't want to be a bad person. However, it didn't seem to work. Alas, Pei Chi-Chi didn't have the slightest intention of remembering. Amy's eyes became moist as she watched. When Pei Chi-Chi was talking to her colleagues, Amy hugged her from the side. Pei Chi-Chi froze for a moment. She felt that Amy was a little smart. Pei Chi-Chi, welcome to our club. Amy couldn't hide the excitement in her voice. Our club's rule is that you can't dress better than me. Pei Chi-Chi smiled. As smart as she was, she had already guessed that Amy and Old Can were people she knew. The business card was given by Tang Yu. How much of her past was hidden in it? Pei Chi-Chi didn't ask, because Tang Yu had told her to find it herself. She didn't want to find it, because she wanted to live a carefree life. She wanted to be happy, just like that. She took root in Beauty magazine. The forthright Old Can, the smart and cute Amy, and Pei Huan, who had just appeared in the afternoon. Pei Huan arrived at 2:00 in the afternoon with the baby. As soon as she arrived, she grabbed Kan Mingzhu's ear and scolded her. Then she threw the baby to Old Can and came to Amy's place to chat, but her eyes were fixed on Pei Chi-Chi's face. Pei Chi-Chi smiled and turned on the computer in front of her to search for information about Yi Liangqiu. Pei Huan was chatting with Amy a second ago, but the next second, she stopped and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. Yi Liangqiu is very difficult to deal with. Pei Chi-Chi looked up at Pei Huan and felt the eagerness in Pei Huan's eyes. She looked at her like a puppy looking at a bone. She touched her face. There was no cumin on it. Yi Liangqiu was made famous by King Entertainment, but even Qin Anlin can't completely control her. Pei Huan had spent quite a bit of time in King Entertainment, so she knew a little about the inside story. Most importantly, Xiao Mei often nagged her. Speaking of which, it was funny. Little Mei hoped that she would become a heavenly queen like Yi Liangqiu. Later on, Little Mei said that what was so good about being Yi Liangqiu? It was lonely at the top. Just thinking about it made her tired. But now, it seemed that Yi Liangqiu was tired because her ultimate goal was the big boss of King Entertainment, Qin Anlin. As Pei Huan spoke, Pei Chi-Chi asked softly, will Qin Anlin return to City B next week? I heard from Xiao Mei, who is my manager, that they will return together. The main reason is that Yi Liangqiu has been quiet for more than 2 years. Now, she wants to make a high-profile comeback. She might join a Hollywood blockbuster as the female lead. Pei Huan told Pei Chi-Chi everything she knew. What she meant was that her darling was now with Yi Liangqiu and might have to support Yi Liangqiu even more. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and smiled. She didn't say anything else. Perhaps Anlin and Yi Liangqiu's relationship was no longer a secret in the industry. Asking her to interview Yi Liangqiu was probably just to remove the veil. That was good too. Pei Chi-Chi prepared some information. After that, Pei Huan pestered her for a chat and insisted on attending the gathering that night. The veins on Lao Can's forehead popped. Chapter 11:15. Old Can looked left and right, feeling embarrassed. He lowered his voice and coughed lightly. Let's talk when we get home. But Pei Huan wasn't someone who was easy to talk to. Kan Mingzhu, tell me about the past 2 years. It wasn't easy. Old Ken understood what she was going to say. His eyes felt a little hot, and he said in a deep voice, "Okay. Let me come over and help you look after the child for a night." He knew that Pei Huan missed Pei Chi-Chi. They hadn't seen each other for 2 years, so there must be a lot to talk about. Although Pei Chi-Chi couldn't remember it clearly, she was still happy and satisfied with how small her brain capacity was. Old Ken went into his office and let Pei Huan talk. At 6 in the evening, they ordered takeout. Because it was summer, they ordered 2 bottles of beer and 5 pounds of crayfish, as well as some other spicy dishes. Pei Huan's mouth was oily as she chatted happily with Pei Chi-Chi. "Chi-Chi, you can't eat such authentic crayfish in America. Let me tell you, a summer without crayfish is not a complete summer." Pei Chi-Chi had also eaten quite a lot. Looking at Pei Huan, she actually felt especially close to her. "Why are you looking at me? Eat. Didn't you see Amy eating by herself in secret? Let me tell you, Amy is lying when she says she's on a diet. She eats more than a pig." Pei Huan and Pei Chi-Chi confided in each other. Pei Chi-Chi just giggled. Amy glared at her and Pei Huan glared back. Suddenly, Pei Chi-Chi was a little envious. She wanted to find her memories for the first time. She wanted to live like Pei Huan, like Amy, truly and truly. At this moment, those dreams of hers became somewhat unrealistic. Without the memories of the past, she was like duckweed without roots. Wherever she went, she would be drifting. Pei Chi-Chi's heart softened. She looked at Pei Huan and Amy. Pei Huan couldn't hide her excitement. Although Amy was fierce, she was very silly and cute. These people must have been her companions in the past. Otherwise, why would they look like they were crying when they were clearly smiling? They talked until 8 o'clock, and the people of the magazine went to the night bar together. Pei Huan pulled Pei Chi-Chi into Old Can's car. Amy squeezed in next to Pei Huan and whispered, "We must send Mang Nan out tonight." Pei Huan sighed in her heart. If it weren't for the fact that Chi-Chi would have a headache, she would have hugged Pei Chi-Chi and cried bitterly. She would have scolded Pei Chi-Chi for spending the past 2 years. Pei Chi-Chi felt that their gazes were fierce, but her heart was warm. This was probably the feeling of being close to home. When it was night time, Old Ken had his subordinates go in and clear the place. He then picked a few tables and sat down. The staff of Beauty magazine were all very playful, and Old Ken had always indulged them, so they all dragged Pei Chi-Chi along to drink and play games. Although he was drinking fruit wine, the after effects were quite strong. After a while, he felt dizzy. Pei Chi-Chi's forehead was covered in sweat. Just like the 2 employees in front of him, he lost again. "Pei Chi-Chi, you're really useless." Pei Huan leaned over from behind and reached out to hit Pei Chi-Chi. "You're going to be punished again." This child didn't know that she was facing 2 nightclub experts. She was very familiar with these little games. Chapter 11:16. At this time, Amy brought a glass of XO and put it in front of Pei Chi-Chi. This time, Pei Chi-Chi lay down again. "You'll die if you drink it." Besides, she couldn't drink hard liquor because her body wouldn't allow it. She leaned on the table and laughed. "Do you have any other punishments?" She looked up at Amy with her head tilted, like a little animal. Even Amy was a bit surprised. She said excitedly, "Of course. For example, find a man with a girl in a bar and kiss him. That's a must." Pei Chi-Chi chuckled. "Pei Huan, can I kiss your Old Can? I don't mind if he has a beard." Old Can pursed his lips and said seriously, "I do mind." Pei Huan hugged his neck and kissed him hard. Then she tilted her head and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. "Pei Chi-Chi, let me tell you. Men are like clothes, and brothers are like limbs. I'll break whoever wears my clothes. Pei Chi couldn't stop laughing. She leaned on the table and pounded it. Amy pushed the glass of XO and coughed. Little Chi, you haven't drunk it yet. Pei Chi lay on the table like a dead dog and looked at them. You only know how to bully newbies. It wasn't easy to get 17,000 yuan. Just when Amy thought that she was going to drink it up, Pei Chi stood up with the help of the table. It's just kissing a man. It's not like I haven't kissed him before. Besides, it was dark here. She could just run away after kissing him. Pei Huan put one hand on Old Can's arm. I want a man with a girl. Does being beaten to death count as dying in the line of duty? It's a work-related injury, isn't it? Pei Chi asked seriously. Pei Huan couldn't stop laughing. I'll protect you. She looked like she was telling Pei Chi to kiss her and that she would protect her from behind. Pei Chi smiled and swayed toward the dark place. As soon as she left, Pei Huan asked Old Can nervously, could it be a wrong kiss? If she kissed the wrong person, her Old Can would either die at work or die in the line of duty. Old Can reached out and patted his wife. I won't. Men like Tang Yu usually made 0 mistakes. Pei Chi went to the front and searched for a long time before she found a male animal with a companion. Since he was tipsy, he didn't see clearly. He apologized to the good-looking woman in a low voice and lowered his head to kiss the man in black. The touch on his lips was very familiar. The faint taste of tobacco had a kind of unforgettable heartbreak. Pei Chi subconsciously took a step back. When she saw the person in front of her, she was stunned. It was Tang Yu. She stepped back and pressed her back against the wall of the cubicle. She stared helplessly at him and the woman across from him. She was a very intelligent and decent woman, and she seemed to be very familiar with him. Pei Chi's first reaction was to wonder if she was his girlfriend. Her little mouth was slightly open as she stared blankly, looking quite adorable. Tang Yu smiled and didn't say anything. Xiao Ran, on the other hand, held back his laughter. Tang Yu, then I'll leave first. She didn't call him president, but Tang Yu. She was a little scheming. In this way, if Pei Chi had feelings for president, she would probably let her imagination run wild at this moment. Xiao Ran was also a woman, so she knew what a woman was thinking. When she left, she felt a little sour in her heart. She came here today purely to cooperate with Tang Yu's act. That was all. It was really a blessing to be able to make a man care so much about a woman, to arrange the path she had taken and to reenact what she had experienced. When Xiao Ran walked out, her eyes were a little warm. She looked up at the neon lights outside and smiled silently. Chapter 11:17. Pei Chi leaned against the wall and looked at Tang Yu, her eyes watery. He was still sitting there, his black outfit blending into the darkness. His voice was a little hoarse. Why don't you ask who she is? Pei Chi leaned back against the wall and looked at him for a long time before saying, who is she? If I say that she's my girlfriend. He smiled at her. Pei Chi, will you be angry? Pei Chi glared at him. She'll be the one who will be angry, right? She didn't realize that the surroundings had dispersed. There were only the two of them in the entire bar. On the table beside them, there was a small birthday cake with candles burning on it. The music in the bar turned into a birthday greeting, very light and gentle. Tang Yu looked at her. Chi, happy birthday. She was still looking at him in disbelief. He walked over, hugged her and brought her to the table. Her small body was placed in front of him and his thin lips were right beside her ear. Chi, you can blow out the candles now. How did you know my birthday? Her voice was a little shaky. She wanted to turn her head to look at him, but he held her little face and didn't let her move. She recalled that his password was his birthday. Was all of this a coincidence? The reason why she was called Pei Chi was because her birthday was July 7th, a day that wasn't blessed. Tang Yu's voice was a little gentle. Chi. She came back to her senses and looked at him again. Then, she smiled and bent over to blow out the candles. His large palm never left her waist. His face was buried in her neck, and his voice was low and husky. Can we dance? She wanted to reject him, but her body and legs were weak. The lights above her head had become dim and gentle, and the music had also become gentle. She was in his arms. He hugged her from behind and moved her gently. His lips were on the side of her neck. No woman could withstand such torture, not to mention that he had always been familiar with her body. In such an ambiguous moment, she turned her face and asked in a low voice, "Have I ever loved you?" There had to be, she thought. Otherwise she would not have felt this way about him, would not have been so defenseless against him. Yes. Then he turned her around, lowered his head, and kissed her deeply, deeply. Not allowing her any struggle, he went straight in and entwined himself with her. She was stunned. She was not used to their new relationship. This must have been prepared in advance, right? Why hadn't he told her the truth instead of arranging it like this? Pei Chi raised her head and opened her mouth slightly. Her entire body was soft. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her again. Pei Chi pursed her lips and bit his lips. Why? He sighed and stroked her little head. Chi, I don't want to make things difficult for you. I don't want to give you a headache either. Just be yourself and do whatever you want, okay? He hoped that she could be happy. Even if she could never remember it, it didn't matter. As long as she still loved him, it was fine. He could wait for her here. He could wait for her to have enough fun outside and come back as long as she was willing to. Pei Chi raised her head and looked at him. After a while, she suddenly took a deep breath. I'll feel guilty if you do this. Chi, you don't need to feel guilty. He stroked her hair. I'm willing. Chapter 11:18. Pei Chi's eyes were a little warm. She looked at the cake again and suddenly said, I want to watch a movie. His gaze was a little deep. I've had some alcohol, so I probably can't drive. Then run. Even though she had drunk some alcohol, her eyes couldn't be any brighter at this moment. Tang Yu smiled and stretched out his hand, looking at her. So, shall we go? Pei Chi lowered his gaze and looked at his palm. As for him, he didn't say anything and waited quietly, as though he had a lifetime to wait. Finally, she placed her hand on his palm and he held it gently. Let's go watch a movie. He was finally walking on the streets with her like ordinary lovers. She hadn't changed much compared to before. She still had her hair tied up in a ponytail and looked like she was in her 20s. Although Tang Yu was handsome, he had the aura of an elite. When the two of them stood together, there was an obvious age difference, but they still looked strangely harmonious. When they arrived at the cinema, she took out his wallet and bought 2 tickets and a big bucket of popcorn. Tang Yu smiled. Can you finish it? And you? She said naturally and queued up to check the tickets. Tang Yu smiled and placed his hands on her shoulders, his face full of love. There were already many girls peeking at them, and Pei Chi also noticed it. It's all your fault. You're too attractive. She turned around and hugged his waist, clinging to him like a tailless bear. Tang Yu patted her. Pei Chi, there are many people looking at you. I'm not afraid. Her voice was like a little lamb. You said that you wanted to be my one-day person. Pei Chi, I actually want to change that day tonight. He smiled and pushed her into the cinema. During the screening, he raised his eyebrows. Pei-Chi-Chi, are you sure you want to watch a horror movie? I'm not afraid. She chewed the popcorn like a little mouse and said with a smile. Tang Yu didn't say anything else. However, when the movie reached the 10-minute mark, the little mouse nestled in his arms, screaming and trembling. Aren't you not afraid? He lowered his head and looked at the little fellow in his arms. Pei-Chi-Chi hugged him tightly, her voice muffled. I'm not afraid, I'm excited. His gaze softened and he stroked her little head. Then, continued to be excited. In the end, he simply carried her onto his lap and let her sit in his arms to watch. The people on the left and right looked at it enviously. This painting was really soft. By the end of the movie, Pei-Chi-Chi was excited for about half the time. I wasn't afraid in the past. I wasn't even afraid when I was watching it with Anlin. She raised her head and said softly. But to him, it was like dropping a super bomb. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes. Did she and Qin Anlin often watch movies together? But he couldn't ask this, because his pride didn't allow him to ask. In fact, he didn't know that he was also angry with Pei-Chi-Chi. Pei-Chi-Chi felt his body stiffen. She chuckled and poked his heart with her little finger. Are you angry? They had agreed to be the eye person for one day, or rather, just for one night. Spending time with him made her feel that. Tang Yu and she had a past. She thought of Xiaoxin and that possibility. Her heart was a little broken for him. Chapter 11-19. Pei-Chi-Chi wasn't a fool. Moreover, Tang Yu's actions were so obvious. He obviously wanted her to remember everything, but he was afraid of provoking her. This fool. Even if she didn't remember anything, she already liked him very, very much. It was only the 5th time they met. But like him, she wanted to carry on this ambiguous relationship to the end. Because now, she was still Anlin's wife. Before it was resolved, neither of them was willing to talk about it. Let's go, Tang Yu. Pei-Chi-Chi lay in his arms. The people around them had already left, leaving only them and the cleaning lady. Tang Yu reached out to touch her and smiled. Okay. He wasn't in a hurry. His Chi-Chi had already guessed it. He also knew that everything that happened tonight would be known by Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin wasn't in City B. He would definitely send someone to follow them, and Kaim was the best candidate. When he went out with her, there was a flash of light. Tang Yu ignored it. He just held her hand and went to the nearby food court. Although it was almost 12 o'clock, it was still very lively there. Tang Yu took her to the food court and fed the piglet until it was full. He watched as she ran in front, turned back and raised her hands for him to take pictures, and watched as she smiled brightly. He had a doting expression on his face. As long as Pei-Chi-Chi was happy, it was fine. The silhouette of time. In his eyes, when she looked back, it was eternal. When she smiled, her eyes curved into crescents. He looked at her and felt that they hadn't changed in the past 2 years. He felt that she had never forgotten him. Even if she became someone else's wife, in the depths of her heart, there would always be a place for him. Tang Yu's eyes were a little moist. He was waiting for her, and his Chi-Chi had actually been waiting for him. He took a picture of her smiling face, then walked over and hugged her in the crowd, lowering his head to kiss her. The sky was drizzling, and the small stalls were all closed up. The early summer night became cool and refreshing, and the surroundings became spacious and empty. But he still kissed her again and again, murmuring her name. The rain was getting heavier. He didn't drive, and there wasn't a single car on the street in the middle of the night. In the end, he took her to a small public phone booth to take shelter from the rain. The transparent glass was covered with water droplets, and each water droplet reflected the prosperity of B City. In such a colorful world, she leaned against the small space and looked up at him hopelessly. Both of their clothes were wet. At this moment, in the narrow space, the temperature rose, and it was hot and humid. That kind of warm temperature could almost burn people. Her breathing was a little hurried, and her chest was heaving up and down. She placed her hands flat on the glass behind her and pressed them further back because he was getting closer and closer. She was kissed fiercely, and their lips touched. It was extremely hot. She stood on tiptoe because it made it easier for her to cater to him. His lips and tongue invaded her, and his large palms were like fire, branding every inch of her skin. It was still raining outside, and the air was cool and thin. In this narrow space, it was warm and hot. Pei-Chi-Chi lowered her eyes, and her eyes were filled with moisture. She looked at his head, and her voice was weak and coquettish. "Don't do this." He half knelt in front of her, and his hands held her little waist firmly, giving her all the wild imagination she had. Perhaps it was the environment, or perhaps it was because he was too familiar with her body, but Pei-Chi-Chi felt that she had died once. Chapter 11:20. Dirty. She gasped for breath, and her little hand tugged hard at his black hair, but he did not seem to feel any pain, until her body went limp. He caught her and held her in his arms. Pei-Chi-Chi bit his shoulder and wrapped her little hands around his waist. She was afraid that if she let go, she would turn into ashes. She was a little afraid of this strange and strong feeling. She had never had such a strong feeling in her memory. She couldn't accept Anlin being kissed like this by Tang Yu. It was a little shameful. After a long time, she let go and bit her lips. "You have to forget." Because it was too embarrassing. Tang Yu smiled. "Chi-Chi, if I forget, I'll never find you again." He held her little face with both hands. It was the most straightforward confession and the closest to the truth. Although Pei-Chi-Chi had already guessed it, she was still a little shocked at the moment. She looked at him, her lips trembling. "Chi-Chi, I told you that you have to find the answer yourself." His fingers gently stroked her lips. "Do you want to explore it now?" His gaze was extremely deep, his gaze deep. Pei-Chi-Chi raised her head and said after a while, "So far, I only want to explore your body. It's my honor." He smiled. "I'll accompany you whenever you want." Pei-Chi-Chi blushed. However, he took a tissue from her bag and helped her clean up. His movements were skillful. She didn't doubt their relationship, but she still felt a little guilty. She thought that he didn't really want her because of the environment. "Chi-Chi, no." He sighed as if he could read her mind. "I just don't want you to feel guilty." She didn't say anything and just hugged him. She hugged this strange and familiar man who she should have loved deeply. "Tang Yu, I'm Xiaoxin's mother, right?" She suddenly said, "I have a wound on my lower abdomen." Perhaps it was because of this wound that she could not accept Anlin and could not be his real wife. That wound was left from giving birth, and she had a vague feeling that the man who had impregnated her was not Anlin. Tang Yu didn't say anything, but he tacitly agreed. Pei-Chi-Chi pouted. In an instant, he felt that he had no advantage in front of Anlin. He and Yi Liangqiu had a child, and she and Tang Yu had also had a child. What was going on? Why did she and Qin Anlin become husband and wife? Chi-Chi, don't think about these things. He was afraid of losing her, afraid that she would suffer. He would rather she knew nothing, forget the dark past, and live again. Pei-Chi-Chi and he stood in the small public phone booth and looked at each other for a long time. They didn't know when the rain stopped. When they went out, the air was so fresh that they greedily inhaled several mouthfuls. "Tang Yu, can you carry me back?" She clung onto his body, sticking to him like glue. Tang Yu squatted down and patted her. "Come on." Pei-Chi-Chi lay on him happily. "Let's go, old ma." He patted her little butt as a punishment, but he still walked in the direction of Xiao City. There were some puddles on the ground after the rain. It was particularly clear when they stepped on it in the dead of night. In the beginning, Pei Chi could still make trouble for him. Later, she was a little sleepy and lay on his shoulder. Her voice was also blurred. Tang Yu, you must have loved me before. Chapter 11:21. Pei Chi replied with a ahem and put her little hands around his shoulders. She was particularly delicate as she called him a brother in his ear, intending to tease him. Tang Yu knew what she was thinking and patted her as a punishment. Later, she was so sleepy that she fell asleep on her stomach. Tang Yu listened to her light breathing and his eyes softened. Chi, I miss you very much. Tang Yu, I miss you very much too. Her dream was sweet and fragrant. She dreamed that she was lying on Tang Yu's shoulder. He asked her who she liked. She said that she liked her father. She was spanked on her little butt. Later, she said to him, Tang Yu's father. Tang Yu's father. Pei Chi was awakened by her own abnormal thoughts. When she woke up, it was already dawn. The morning after the rain was particularly fresh. She sat up and found a white rose on the bedside table. She smiled and picked up the rose. After looking at it for a long time, she smiled. She got off the bed barefoot, opened the window, took a deep breath and turned around. She saw a little person sitting on her bed, Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin was wearing a white dress and carrying a small bag on her back. She sat neatly on her bed. Pei Chi blinked her eyes. Towards this little fellow who could very well be her own child, her feelings were especially complicated. Was this little rascal really her child? She looked at the little rascal, and the little rascal was also looking at her. After a while, Xiaoxin pouted her little mouth. Chi, you don't seem surprised at all. Pei Chi immediately gave 2 stiff paws. I'm very surprised. May I ask, how did you come in? Dad brought me here. Xiaoxin said confidently. Dad is on a business trip for 2 days. I want to stay here with you. Pei Chi coughed lightly. You know about our relationship. Dad said that his YY chromosome and your X chromosome crossed together, so I was born. Xiaoxin's little face was taut. Pei Chi, don't tell me you don't want to admit it. Pei Chi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was as if she had used him and then abandoned him. But she saw through Xiaoxin's bluff. The little fellow was fierce, but in his heart, he was afraid that she did not love her. Pei Chi walked over, bent down and looked at Xiaoxin seriously. I may not be able to accept that I have a daughter, but I like Xiaoxin very much. I can call you sister. Xiaoxin said with some dislike, I've called you that before anyway. Pei Chi did not know whether to laugh or cry. She dropped another bomb in her heart. In the past, you often called Dad Big Brother. Sometimes, you even called him Dad like me. Pei Chi was stunned. Was there really such a pervert? Was it better if she didn't recover her memory? Xiaoxin fell into her arms and hugged her tightly. Then, she burst into tears. Xiaoxin was extremely scared without her mother by her side for a long time. She was afraid that Chi would never come back. Now, she was afraid that Chi would not like her. She was even more afraid that Chi would never remember her and did not want her anymore. Chi, Xiaoxin missed you so much. Xiaoxin lay in her arms and moved her little mouth in her arms. Pei Chi's heart softened and she unbuttoned her clothes. Xiaoxin lay down contentedly and ate. Although she did not have any, she always smelled good in her mother's arms. Xiaoxin chirped a few times and then cried in dissatisfaction. Why did her little milk bottle smell like smoke? Dad must have eaten it secretly. Chapter 11:22. Xiaoxin started to cry. Pei Qiqi was a little confused. She had sacrificed herself, but the little rascal was still not satisfied. Xiaoxin cried for a while, but no one comforted her. Mother is bad. Pei Qiqi was actually a little bit of a prankster. It was quite interesting to see Xiaoxin like this. It was just like when Tang Yu watched her cry. Sometimes, he would not feel sorry for her, but he would appreciate it for a while. Xiaoxin cried even harder. She held it with her little hands and forced herself to eat a few more mouthfuls. Then, she cried and fell asleep. Pei Qiqi found it a little funny and her heart softened. She reached out and touched the little fellow's little head. There was a thin layer of sweat on the little fellow's forehead because of crying. Baby, let's take a bath together, okay? She rubbed the slightly curly hair. She had a feeling that she was willing to give everything she had to the little person in front of her. Xiaoxin cried and cried, but when she heard this, she was revived. Her eyes widened as she looked at Pei Qiqi. Really? Pei Qiqi carried the little person into the bathroom, filled the bath with warm water and lay down with the little fellow. Xiaoxin sat on her waist and was very happy. Pei Qiqi lowered her head and looked at the shallow scar on her waist and then at Xiaoxin. Her eyes were a little warm. This was her child. She reached out to touch her and easily accepted this reality. Just when she was feeling touched, the bathroom door was opened. She looked up at the godlike man at the door in confusion. Her little mouth was a little wide open. Tang Yu did not expect to see such a scene when he came back after the flight was cancelled. But he soon smiled happily and leaned against the door, taking a bath early in the morning. You will feel dizzy if you soak in it for a long time. Pei Qiqi used Xiaoxin to cover her body and poked her head out. Aren't you on a business trip? He was wearing a formal handmade suit and looked elegant. She noticed that he was even wearing cufflinks. He should be going to an important business event. Her little face was bitter. Why did he come back? Tang Yu took off his coat and threw it aside. He then took off his cufflinks and rolled his sleeves up to his elbows. If she still didn't know anything, then when he unbuttoned his shirt one by one and put on his belt, what else did Pei Qiqi not know? She closed her eyes and said in a weak voice, Tang Yu, be careful. His body was submerged in the warm water. Fortunately, the bathtub was big enough, and he was on the other side just enough to touch her feet. He moved over and grabbed her little feet. If Xiaoxin isn't here, do you have any thoughts? Pei Qiqi snorted. Of course not. She covered herself, but she didn't know that covering herself like this made her look even more alluring. Tang Yu calmly carried little Xin down from her body and placed her on his waist. Initially, she did not think that it was a big deal, but after 2 seconds, she immediately covered her body and looked at him in surprise. She had been seen naked. She shrank back and glared at him. He was so bad. Tang Yu just smiled faintly. He grabbed Xiaoxin's arm and played her favorite game with her while talking to Pei Qiqi calmly. Xiaoxin is 5 years old. I want her to go to kindergarten in the fall, he said and glanced at her. Chapter 11:23. Pei Qiqi bit her lip. It's up to you. He looked at her again. I'm discussing with you, Qiqi. This was an ordinary sentence, but it had a profound meaning. She was a little stunned and couldn't say anything for a long time. Tang Yu smiled again. Qiqi. She came back to her senses and was in a daze for a moment. She finally understood that he was discussing this matter with her as Xiaoxin's mother, but she was not ready yet. This was different from playing with Xiaoxin. This change in identity made her feel a little helpless. Tang Yu reached out and carried her over. Xiaoxin sat in front while she sat behind him. Anne. Pei Chi felt a strange feeling the moment she sat on him. She shifted her body uneasily, but the more she moved, the more she was stuck there. Tang Yu did not seem to feel anything. He propped himself up and hugged Xiaoxin forward. Pei Chi immediately moved forward. That feeling made Tang Yu exhale deeply, and his gaze became deeper. I bought a chain of institutions, and all their teachers are here. Take a look, who do you think is suitable to be Xiaoxin's tutor? Tang Yu handed the phone to her. Pei Chi took it and sat on him. She looked through them one by one and pouted. They seemed to be very young and good-looking. Xiaoxin can call them little sister. Tang Yu smiled. Are you jealous? Of course not. She looked very cute and pouted, as long as you like them. She threw the phone back to him and hugged Xiaoxin. Your father is going to find you a new mother. Xiaoxin covered her little face and howled. Tang Yu sat up and pinched Pei Chi's little face. Nonsense. He was angry and amused at the same time. She was a little old, but it seemed like she could live again. Although she used to act coquettishly, she did not act like this. Since she was fooling around, Tang Yu was also fooling around. He held her waist and moved her back a little. Pei Chi wailed and stared at him with tears in her eyes. But because of her little heart, she could only bite her lips and endure the piercing pain. Tang Yu chuckled. Are you still going to spout nonsense? She got through it, grinding her teeth, meaning to bite him. Tang Yu chuckled and moved closer to her ear. Then, carry Xiaoxin outside. Pei Chi leaned down and bit his waist. Tang Yu's gaze was a little distant. He pulled her little head up and kissed her little mouth. He wrapped himself around her and kissed her again and again. His little heart was screaming in the middle, as if he was about to drown. Pei Chi hammered him. Be careful, but the sound was swallowed back into his stomach. He chuckled. Don't worry about her. This kiss ignited the fire in his whole body. In the end, Tang Yu took a cold shower for half an hour. When he returned to the bedroom, the adult and the child were sitting on the bed and building blocks. The scene was very loving. Tang Yu looked at them silently for a while and threw a towel in front of her. Help me dry my hair. He sat down to play with Xiaoxin, and she naturally knelt behind him to dry his hair. At that moment, some fragmented scenes kept flashing in his mind. Pei Chi shook her head and looked at Tang Yu in front of her. Her lips moved and she called out, Tang Yu. Chapter 11:24. Tang Yu looked at her with a deep gaze. Stretching out his hand, he gently ruffled her long hair and called her name. She raised her head and opened her mouth slightly. There was an indescribable vulnerability in her eyes. She seemed to have remembered something, but she wasn't so sure. She just stared at him. Tang Yu, Tang Yu. She felt that he was the name engraved in her heart. She was finally sure. He got close to her and did so many things just to remind her of the past. She didn't remember, but she was sure that he was the one she was looking for. This was the reason why she wanted to stay in B City. She wore a bathrobe and sat in front of him. Her long hair spilled all over her body. It was very touching. This gaze was like a promise for a lifetime. But her expression suddenly became painful. She pressed her head with her hand. It hurts. Tang Yu was shocked. He quickly got out of bed, found some medicine, and fed it to her. After a while, she relaxed and leaned into his arms with a pale face. Chi, can I take you to the hospital to see the doctor? Tang Yu pressed her little head into his arms, feeling a little heartache. It wasn't right to keep taking this medicine. Pei Chi was afraid of going to the hospital. She shook her head and buried her little face in his arms coquettishly. Her little hands hugged his waist, and she didn't make a sound. He was a little helpless. Xiaoxin's chubby little body hugged Pei Chi from behind. Her short and fat legs curled around Pei Chi's waist like a tailless little bear. Her voice was soft and velvety as she said, "Chi, listen to Daddy." Although the little fellow usually didn't care, she was especially nervous at this time. She pouted and kissed her on the back. "Chi, listen to Daddy. Xiaoxin isn't afraid of injections." Pei Chi felt so embarrassed. Tang Yu smiled. He looked at the one in his arms and the other in the back. His gaze was extremely gentle. His fingers pinched Pei Chi's little face. His voice was a little hoarse. "Look, Xiaoxin isn't afraid. Our Chi is already so big. She should be even more afraid." His words were full of love. Pei Chi stayed in his arms. She had a feeling that she didn't want to leave for the rest of her life. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "I'll help you change. Be good and go to the hospital." He had wanted to take her there for a long time. Because her previous illness was treated in America, there had never been an opportunity. Pei Chi was afraid of pain and wanted to deny it, but Tang Yu had already walked into the changing room and picked out a set of clothes. He helped her put on the clothes carefully, as if he was taking care of her. Pei Chi's heart softened. No wonder Xiaoxin said that she used to call Tang Yu Daddy. Was the way they interacted in the past really so abnormal? She pursed her lips. Since when did she suspect that this was a place she had stayed in before? Perhaps it was because everything here was to her liking. The decorations, furnishings, everything. Perhaps it was because she could find what she was looking for even with her eyes closed. Even the items in the fridge were exactly the same as her habits. Not to mention that the bathrobe smelled like the brand she was used to, and even the tissue in his car was her favorite brand. Tang Yu knew her a lot better than Anlin. Moreover, there was Xiaoxin. The child looked more like Tang Yu, but there was also some resemblance between his eyes and brows. Chapter 11:25. Xiaoxin followed behind and stared blankly at Papa's princess. In the past, Papa only hugged her, but now it seemed that Papa loved Chi more. Her eyes were watery. Xiaoxin had fallen out of favor. Tang Yu touched Pei Chi's head with one hand and said, "Hold her. Take a nap in the car." He didn't care whether he spoiled her or not. He just wanted to spoil her so that she couldn't leave him. Pei Chi's head was indeed a little dizzy, and she fell into a deep sleep in the crook of his arm. Tang Yu put her in the car and looked at Xiaoxin. "Take good care of your mother." Xiaoxin nodded with tears in her eyes. Tang Yu knew what his little princess was thinking. He touched her head and chuckled. "In the future, we will have our prince to protect us." And her father had to protect her mother. He got in the car, fastened the seatbelt, and drove to Xingyuan Hospital. On the way, he contacted Dr. Yuan and told him that he would go there as soon as he arrived. When the car stopped in the parking lot of the hospital, Pei Chi woke up. "We're at the hospital." Tang Yuan fastened the seatbelt, opened the back door, and held Xiaoxin in one hand and helped Pei Chi get off the car with the other because she insisted on not being carried. In the bright and clean hall of Xingyuan Hospital, the marble floor was polished. Because it was the weekend, there were many patients. Tang Yu walked to the elevator with Pei Chi and Xiaoxin, ready to go upstairs to find Dr. Yuan. But he didn't expect to meet Qin Anlin and his family of 3. A family of 3 met a family of 3, and the scene was very subtle. Qin Anlin held Yi Muyun in his arms and walked side by side with Yi Liangqiu to the elevator. Yi Liangqiu was wearing sunglasses and didn't look good. Tang Yu and his family of 3 were standing in the elevator, so they were face to face. The atmosphere was stiff. Especially Qin Anlin and Pei Chi, who were having sex in marriage, their expressions were very interesting. "Ah, you're out? Ah, you're out too. I'm relieved." At this moment, if they said anything more, it would undoubtedly make the situation even more awkward, so neither side made a sound. Pei Chi sneaked a peek at the little boy. He was good-looking and looked more like Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlin and Tang Yu nodded slightly, but their eyes were locked on Pei Chi's little face. They asked in a hoarse voice, "What's wrong?" Pei Chi's voice was also a little hoarse. "I have a headache. Come and take a look." As for why he had a headache, Qin Anlin certainly knew. He glanced at Tang Yu with a reproachful look. For this reason, Tang Yu did not explain. Yi Liangqiu remained silent, as if she had nothing to do with it. However, her son, Yi Muyun, kept staring at Xiaoxin. He looked at that small, soft, and fat little guy. He had never seen such a beautiful little thing. Moreover, she was fat and cute. Her little arms were little by little. She must be delicious. Yi Muyun was a little guy who was almost perversely picky about food. He had no interest in all kinds of food, but now, he finally found something delicious. It was the little heart in front of him. 7-year-old Yi Muyun decided to eat Xiaoxin. His gaze was abnormally fervent. He did not notice the turbulence between adults. Only Xiaoxin saw it, and her eyes were filled with tears. This little brother's gaze was so scary, as if he wanted to eat Xiaoxin. "Xiaoxin, you know the truth." Chapter 11:26. Little Muyun slowly struggled out of Qin Anlin's embrace. Xiaoxin didn't want anyone to hug him, and he didn't want an adult to hug him either. His gaze became even more fervent, and Xiaoxin felt a gust of malicious intent. She didn't want to be eaten. As soon as the elevator door opened, Xiaoxin was the first to rush out. The nurse at the elevator door was holding a few hot water bottles in her hands. She was about to enter, and Xiaoxin just happened to bump into. The hot water didn't burn Xiaoxin, but the nurse dodged, and Xiaoxin's body crashed straight into the wall. Tang Yu immediately stretched out his hands to block it, but a small figure was faster and blocked Xiaoxin's way. It was little Muyun. However, he was still young after all, and his body was incredibly fragile. Normally, a single touch would leave bruises all over his body. After this collision, blood immediately gushed out from his forehead like a fountain. All of this had to be replenished by Qin Anlin, the mobile blood bank. Xiaoxin was scared silly, and stared blankly at the little brother in front of him who was bleeding like a fountain. Xiaoxin was afraid of blood, and after staring for a while, his fat little body fell down and he fainted. This change was something that the adults didn't expect. Qin Anlin pressed little Muyun's forehead, and Tang Yu carried Xiaoxin and said in a low voice, "Go to the emergency room immediately, I'll arrange for a doctor." He didn't like Qin Anlin, but Qin Anlin's son was like that because he wanted to protect Xiaoxin. The child was only a few years old, but he didn't cry or make a fuss. From the bottom of his heart, Tang Yu admired him. The group of people rushed to the emergency room, and the doctor stopped the bleeding for Yi Muyun. However, his body was special, and it only stopped after 5 minutes. During this time, Qin Anlin took another 200 milliliters of blood and gave it to Yi Muyun. Pei Chi had long forgotten about her headache. She looked at the child and Yi Liangqiu's expression of forbearance. She suddenly felt that it was shameful for her to be Mrs. Qin. His real wife and children were here. Pei Chi pursed her lips and looked at little Xin. Little Xin had already revived and was staring at Yi Muyun. Yi Muyun's bleeding stopped, but the doctor said with pity, there might be a scar on his forehead. He paused. But as a boy, appearance isn't the most important thing. Qin Anlin didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, as long as he's fine. From the beginning to the end, there was no communication between the two women because their relationship was too delicate. Pei Chi felt apologetic, especially when she saw little Mu Yun's strong look. Her eyes turned red like a little rabbit, and she said in a low voice, "Thank you for saving little Xin." Yi Muyun sat weakly on the hospital bed. He looked at his mother who was making delicious snacks. Pei Chi, and then looked at little Xin. There was a trace of unfathomable depth in the eyes of this little person. He only smiled lightly and didn't say anything. Such a fat and tender little fellow was like a small steamed bun. If it was damaged, it wouldn't be delicious anymore. Saving her was to preserve the integrity of the food so that it could be eaten in one bite in the future. The adults all thought that Yi Muyun loved his little sister, but they didn't know that he had so many thoughts. Only little Xin looked at Yi Muyun with tears in her eyes. This little brother showed an expression that he wanted to eat her up again. So scary. Chapter 11:27. Yi Liangqiu and the doctor were discussing the child's condition. Qin Anlin glanced at Pei Chi and said, "Let's go out and talk for a while." He led the way out. Pei Chi looked at Tang Yu anxiously. Xiaoxin looked at Pei Chi anxiously. After a while, Tang Yu smiled and reached out to stroke her little head. "Go on. I'll look after the little friend." He was very generous, but this generosity was something he had no choice but to do. Qin Anlin had saved her life. She had feelings for Qin Anlin. He had seen her hugging Qin Anlin's arm with his own eyes. They were like brothers. How could he destroy such a relationship? If he destroyed it, then he would probably be detested in Chi-Chi's heart. He had done a lot for her. Only he could feel the bitterness of it. But he didn't want to make things difficult for his Chi-Chi. He didn't want to at all. Yi Muyun looked up at this uncle. He was clearly unwilling, but he still let his mother go out. Pei Chi walked out and paused. She saw Qin Anlin at the end of the aisle. He held a cigarette in his hand and looked at her quietly. She walked over slowly. When she was 2 steps away from him, she called out to Anlin. Qin Anlin's gaze was a little indifferent. He rarely looked at her with such an indifferent gaze. After a long while, he said, "You've been with him for the past 2 days." Pei Chi nodded her head heavily. She looked up at him and said, "Anlin, let me finish," he interrupted her, his tone a little rough. Pei Chi pursed her lips. Qin Anlin turned around and looked out of the window, leaving her with a desolate back view. He took 2 deep puffs of his cigarette and said softly, "Chi, this is my past." She paused for a moment, knowing that he was going to lay his cards on the table. If he hadn't happened to bump into Yi Liangqiu and Yi Muyun today, he probably wouldn't have told her about their existence. Furthermore, he didn't ask about her and Tang Yu, which further proves that her past is Tang Yu and Xiaoxin. "Anlin." She called his name softly. "Why don't you accept her?" His back stiffened, but he didn't speak for a long time. Pei Chi thought he wouldn't answer, but he slowly turned around and looked at her. "Chi, if we hadn't been together for the past 2 years, I think I would have decided to marry her because of Mu Yun." With that, he laughed self-deprecatingly. Yi Liangqiu had been clean all these years, probably for this day, but no one would have thought that God would arrange for Pei Chi to be by his side. "With these 2 years, I can't give up." He looked at her with pain in his dark eyes. "Chi, am I someone you can give up?" His words had trapped her. Pei Chi hung her head. "Anlin, I'm sorry. You still want to divorce me, don't you?" His voice was hoarse and his hand trembled. The cigarette in his hand almost burned himself. Especially since he had just had his blood drawn, he didn't look too good. This kind of Qin Anlin made Pei Chi heart ache. After all, He had lived with her for 2 years, and he had been very good to her. During the 2 years when she had lost her memory, he had always taken care of her. In fact, these 2 years could be said to be happy. Even if they were husband and wife in name, he would send her flowers on Valentine's Day, give her gifts on her birthday, and take her skiing on Christmas. Chapter 11:28. How could Cheen Anlin not know that he was using the past to force her? He felt that he was a bit pitiful. They were clearly two parallel lines, yet he just had to hold her back, not letting her go too far. Cheen Anlin chuckled bitterly. Chi-Chi, I'm going back to City B. If you're free, remember to come home. He placed a key in her palm for a long time before saying in a low voice, you know the address. Pei Chi-Chi lifted her eyes and looked at his pained eyes. He turned around and said in a hoarse voice, Chi-Chi, go. Go before I regret it. He didn't agree to the divorce. Instead, he had a negative attitude. He let her be with Tang Yu because he had Yi Liangqiu by his side. Everything had happened too coincidentally. Pei Chi-Chi stood behind him, feeling indescribably sad. It would be a lie to say that she didn't like Cheen Anlin at all. It was just that the feelings were too mixed. She was very comfortable with him, just like family. She didn't feel moved. But he was sad, so was she. She went forward gently and hugged him from behind, just like how they hugged each other in New York. She hugged him a little shamelessly. Anlin, don't be angry. His back stiffened. After a while, he smiled bitterly. I'm not angry at you. As he said that, his voice became even lower. I'm angry at myself. Chi-Chi, if I hadn't been so ridiculous in the past, I wouldn't have let go of you. I definitely wouldn't. After Pei Chi-Chi left, Kaim appeared behind Cheen Anlin silently. President Cheen. Cheen Anlin's eyes were a little red when he turned around. Did you get it? Kaim looked at President Cheen's expression and didn't dare to say anything. He silently handed over a paper bag and left. Cheen Anlin lowered his head and looked at the thing. After a long time, he untied the string one by one. Opening the file, there were dozens of photos inside, each of which was of Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi. There were scenes of them celebrating their birthday in a bar, at a movie theater, kissing in a public phone booth. The scenes were very intense. There was also the scene of Tang Yu carrying Pei Chi-Chi home in the middle of the night. Cheen Anlin's eyes were a little red, and even his hands were shaking. After a while, he took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and took a long drag. He raised his head to prevent the heat from filling his eyes. Behind him, Yi Liangqiu stood there. She silently watched this man, watching him grieve over another woman. She slowly said, Mu Yun might need another 200 milliliters of blood. Her voice was cold-blooded and heartless, as if he was a blood bank. Cheen Anlin suddenly turned around and stared at her. Yi Liangqiu's gaze also fell on the paper bag in his hand. She knew that it was Kaim who had given it to him, but Cheen Anlin didn't know that Kaim had betrayed him and had already been used by Tang Yu. Cheen Anlin looked at Yi Liangqiu and asked, in your heart, I'm just a moving blood bank, right? Sometimes, he suspected that this woman was cold-blooded. If she loved him as she appeared to love him, then why was she so calm when she took his blood? Yi Liangqiu's voice was very calm as she said, yes. Cheen Anlin sneered. Yi Liangqiu, why did you tell me about Mu Yun's existence at this time? Don't tell me that you didn't make a deal with Tang Yu. The deal is on that day, she said bluntly. She had always dared to say it. Chapter 11:29. In the face of his questioning, Yi Liangqiu was still unmoved. She was very calm. Because I want to give Mu Yun the best. Your blood is the best for him. Qin Anlin couldn't deny it. However, he had an urge to strangle the woman in front of him. Yi Liangqiu's tone was indifferent. Mu Yun is waiting. She was the first to leave, but Qin Anlin held her back. Yi Liangqiu turned around. Qin Anlin was looking at her with a burning gaze. His gaze was definitely not kind, and before she could analyze the meaning behind his gaze, her body was pressed against the wall. Then, her lips were kissed, fiercely. She widened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. He was kissing her. Just when Pei Chi had just left. However, she soon found out that he wasn't kissing her, but punishing her. He bit her lips and abused her little mouth, biting her until it was swollen and painful. It was definitely uncomfortable, and there wasn't even a trace of pleasure. She struggled for a while, but in return, she was even more ferocious. Her body was almost crushed against the wall, and her ribs were aching as though they were about to break. His thin lips were hot against the side of her neck, and he bit down on it as a punishment. Yi Liangqiu let out a low cry, and her beautiful eyes opened, and were stained with a tinge of pain. Yi Liangqiu, do you also know pain? Qin Anlin tasted a metallic taste. That was her blood. He moved his face up and stuck it against her face. Their eyes were locked, and his voice was incomparably cold. Yi Liangqiu, I thought you weren't afraid of pain and didn't feel anything. It turns out that you can also feel pain. As he said that, he suddenly let go of her and licked the blood at the side of his lips. He looked at her coldly and kept retreating. In the end, she was left alone. Yi Liangqiu put her hands behind her back and pressed them against the wall. It was not easy for her to support her body. She looked at his back and reached out to touch the wound on her neck. He said he thought she wouldn't feel any pain. How could she not feel pain? That 19-year-old girl was called into his office and opened in such a shameful way. How could it not hurt? When she was pregnant, she didn't dare tell him because he said that she was a rising star of King Entertainment. If she told him that she was pregnant, he would definitely make her abort the child. What he wanted was a commodity, not her as a person, much less her child. At that time, she endured great pain, completed one work after another, she will pain. Later, she went into hiding and gave birth to the child. In that small hospital, she used all her strength to give birth to Mu Yun. That heart-wrenching love, if it wasn't pain, then what was it? At that time, she was not even 20 years old. She gave birth to a child for a man who didn't love her and treated her like a commodity. Now, he said she didn't know pain. Qin Anlin, it's not that I don't feel pain, it's that I'm numb to it. It's so painful that I want to give up. She walked into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. In the mirror, she was extremely pale, but there was a bright red bite mark on her neck. It was very warm. Yi Liangqiu gently stroked it and smiled. Who would have thought that this was a kiss filled with hatred? When she returned, Mu Yun had already undergone a blood transfusion and was lying quietly asleep. Qin Anlin's palm gently stroked Mu Yun's little face. His expression was very gentle, not at all like the coldness he showed to her. Yi Liangqiu laughed softly. She laughed at herself and also laughed at Qin Anlin. If he didn't love her deeply, why did he force himself on her? Did she scheme against him, or did he mislead her? She couldn't tell. Chapter 1130. After this incident, Pei Chichi's headache magically stopped. She went to Dr. Yuan's office and saw that Tang Yu was talking to Dr. Yuan. There was a stack of medical records in his hands. She glanced at it and realized that it was hers. Later on, Tang Yu asked her to take Xiaoxin out to play while he talked to Dr. Yuan. Although they were in the hospital, the two men were much more casual when they were behind closed doors. Tang Yu and Dr. Yuan each smoked a cigarette. After a long time, Dr. Yuan asked bitterly, "How is Chongshan recently?" Tang Yu held the cigarette and glanced at Dr. Yuan silently. Then he said slowly, "Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. When he's good, he's quite normal. But when he's bad, he can't recognize anyone." Mrs. Shen's eyes are damaged. Dr. Yuan sighed. Originally, Chongshan wouldn't have a problem so soon. It wouldn't be a problem for him to endure for another 5 or 10 years. But after being provoked by Shen Lian 2 years ago, he was not doing well anymore. Dr. Yuan's voice was heavy. "Where's Shen Lian?" "She's in the sanatorium. Someone is watching her," Tang Yu said calmly. But Dr. Yuan knew that it was not the case. Shen Lian's cranial nerves weren't too badly damaged and could be treated. However, Tang Yu didn't let her go to jail. Instead, he locked her up in the sanatorium. There, it was even darker than being in jail. There were 4 people watching over Shen Lian all day long. Shen Lian's hands and feet were tied up every day. She was in a clear mind and suffered a lot. But this was the price she had to pay. Although Dr. Yuan felt that it was too cruel, she was not crazy. But the demons in her heart were too deep. Dr. Yuan let out a long sigh. "I didn't expect that Chongshan's happy life would end up like this." Tang Yu looked at the cigarette between his fingers. After a while, he said softly, "Fortunately, someone is always with him." Dr. Yuan understood and sent him out. Before they parted, he looked at Tang Yu. "Maybe it's a blessing that Chi-Chi will never remember." Tang Yu nodded. Dr. Yuan smiled. "Take good care of her. She is Chongshan's only child." He wanted to say something, but Tang Yu knew what he wanted to say. He paused for a moment. "I'll help Chi-Chi manage the company, but she's like a child now. Let's play for a few more years." In fact, Tang Yu didn't want Pei Chi-Chi to work so hard. Chi-Chi was talented, but she had always been unwilling to manage a company. He didn't want to make things difficult for her. Dr. Yuan nodded dejectedly. This was Chongshan's last wish, but Tang Yu couldn't bear to part with Pei Chi-Chi and wanted to protect her. There was nothing wrong with that. Tang Yu slowly went downstairs and sat in the car. Behind him, an adult and a child were lying on their stomachs, looking at him. It was obvious that they had waited long enough. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Tang Yu. "Are you all right? What could possibly happen?" Tang Yu smiled and caressed her little face. Pei Chi-Chi let out a cry and hugged his arm. "I'll come over tomorrow. I heard from the nurse that Yi Muyun is going to be hospitalized." Tang Yu buckled his seatbelt and said, "That's good. Bring Xiaoxin with you." "What about you?" She didn't know that her voice was full of dependence. Although she said she couldn't remember, Tang Yu was very important to her. He was so important that he was the closest person to her. Maybe she hadn't forgotten about him at all. Tang Yu smiled. "I really have to go on a business trip tomorrow." Chapter 1131. Tang Yu's breathing became erratic. Feeling her embrace, it was as if he had returned to the past. After a while, he patted her hand and said in a hoarse voice, "All right, Chi-Chi, stop fooling around. Otherwise, Xiaoxin will laugh at you." She said very seriously, "Don't call Xiaoxin mommy. I want to be an older sister." Xiaoxin cried out, "Older sister," at the side. Tang Yu turned the steering wheel and said meaningfully, "Then Chi-Chi, you have to call me daddy too." After returning home, when Xiaoxin was asleep, he pressed down on the little girl and kissed her in the bathroom. It was so sticky that she could not get enough of it. She could also feel his excitement. Pei Chi-Chi's body was as soft as water. If he had not held her up, she would have fallen. She had always desired his body. Now that she was being kissed like this, she could not take it anymore. Her little hand hung around his neck and her little mouth moved closer for him to kiss. Her lips were slightly red and swollen, but why was he still kissing her after kissing her? The little girl was a little dissatisfied and rubbed against him. Tang Yu lowered his head and nibbled on her ear. "You want me to kiss you there?" Pei Chi looked up. Her watery eyes were filled with unquestionable desire. She remembered that when he kissed her in the pavilion, the humidity mixed with the rain, the dazzling sky, she shook her head and nodded, looking at him pitifully like a puppy. Tang Yu nibbled on her little neck. "Beg me. Chi. Call me daddy. Pervert." Her little foot kicked at him, but he caught it in his hand and did something indescribable. These were all beyond Pei Chi's imagination. She felt that her little foot was about to catch fire. Tang Yu kissed her and murmured, "Chi." She bit her little mouth and looked up at his charming and handsome face. She bit him again and said in a low voice, "You pervert." He scooped her up and lifted her up. Then, under her gaze, he kissed her passionately. She couldn't help but let out a cry, her small hands clutching his arm tightly. Her body felt like it was being thrown into the sky. She didn't know where she touched, but the water in the bathroom floated down, cooling the hot temperature. Her head was dizzy, but she still had a trace of rationality. He had the intention to torture her. Moreover, this place was warmer and 100 times more convenient than the little pavilion. But in the end, he did not really give it to her. Just like that, Pei Chi was already on the verge of death. She deeply felt the profoundness of this knowledge. When it was over, she lay in the bathtub with him. She lay in his arms like a little animal and nibbled. After witnessing a certain man's shameless act, Pei Chi's worldview was completely destroyed. What nobility, what abstinence, they were all lies. Looking at the expression on his face when he was enjoying it, it was especially, she never knew that when a man was aroused, his panting could be so pleasant. Just hearing it made her blood boil. She lay on her stomach and grabbed him with her little hand. "Tang Yu, you can't be. That you can't do it, right? How could a normal man be able to endure it?" She had just finished speaking when she moaned. "Because Tang Yu looked at the little girl in his arms who was seeking death. His fingers gently touched her slightly swollen little mouth. His tone was very gentle. "Chi, do you really want to know if I can do it?" Chapter 1132. She bit him with her mouth. "No more, no more." Tang Yu smiled and laid back down to calm himself down. This was considered letting her off the hook. After a while, the little person bravely crawled over and whispered "Daddy" in his ear. This sound almost drove Tang Yu crazy. Although he had tortured her several times, he still managed to hold the last line of defense. Pei Chi bit her lip, lay on the bed and sighed. What was he waiting for? What was the difference between what they were doing and what they were really doing? Pei Chi was thinking about morality, while Tang Yu was thinking about strategy. Right now, Pei Chi was like a kitten that couldn't be tamed. She longed for him and liked Xiaoxin, but it was not enough, because she still had Anlin in her heart. She could not do it without hesitation, so Tang Yu would rather keep her hanging. It was like a piece of meat. She had tasted the juice on the outside and smelled the smell, but she would not be able to take a bite, so she would keep thinking about it. Tang Yu accompanied them for a day, got out of bed early the next morning and got dressed. Pei Chi woke up, wrapped in the quilt and looked at him. "You're leaving so early." Tang Yu did not stop his hands, bent down slightly and kissed her. "I'll be back the day after tomorrow." He did not immediately leave her lips, but kissed her for a long time, then murmured, "After seeing Yi Muyun today, we'll eat out for lunch. I'll ask Lao Zhao to pick up Xiaoxin in the afternoon." Pei Chi was a little worried. Will she be okay if you're not at home? Tang Yu chuckled, then said, Lao Zhao will send her to my mother's. He paused. Chi, how about I give you the address and you send her there, huh? I don't want to. She cried softly, her little face blushing. Tang Yu pinched her little face. You've known my mother for 5 years, yet you're still so shy. He did not force her and left after giving her some instructions. Finally, he paused and said, Xiaoxin's teacher has been chosen. He's 35 years old. Don't worry, I'm not worried. She hung from him and let him carry her to the locker room, where his suitcase was. Tang Yu put her down and kissed her. Be good at home, okay? She looked at him reluctantly. Finally, she made another move and sat on his suitcase. Tang Yu watched helplessly. She clung onto him like a cat and stared at him. When I wasn't here, did you have anyone else? Tang Yu's gaze was a little deep. He walked over and carried her up, pressing her down on the sofa. She was a little excited, her little claws scratching around. He smiled and held her down. If I did, I wouldn't be like this, he said 2 words in a low voice, thirst. Then you can still bear it. The little girl in his arms bit her lip and looked at him with seductive eyes. Tang Yu let out a heavy breath. Chi, are you sure you want to tease me like this? He had endured for 2 years. If he really did something to her, it would be very rough, and she might not be able to bear it. Pei Chi howled and did not say anything else. She only touched him gently, feeling a little reluctant to let him go. How could Tang Yu not know that? He kissed her little mouth. Be good. Come back after the matter is resolved. She understood what he meant and blushed. He said it as if she really wanted to. Chapter 1133. Pei Chi was caught up in his prank. She ignored him and buried her little face in the sofa. Tang Yu patted her little butt and left with his luggage. As soon as he left, Pei Chi felt quite lonely. She slowly sat up straight and hugged herself. She was a little hesitant, but after a while, she became clear-headed again. If it wasn't for his deep love, why would he endure it? After Xiaoxin woke up, she made delicious tomato and egg noodles for Xiaoxin and fed the little fellow until it was full. Then, they went for a walk in the small park and bought a beautiful fruit basket from the nearest shop to take them to the hospital. Qin Anlin wasn't there, and only Yi Liangqiu accompanied Yi Muyun. The atmosphere was a little uncomfortable, but it was much better than Qin Anlin's presence. Xiaoxin was inexplicably afraid of Yi Muyun, because her little brother's gaze seemed to want to eat Xiaoxin up. Yi Liangqiu greeted them very indifferently, and even specially ordered a dessert that little girls liked to eat for Xiaoxin. Pei Chi looked at the Empress Yi. The Empress Yi, who could only be seen on the big screen, appeared in front of her so closely. She wasn't as cold as frost, at least she was gentle to little girls like Xiaoxin. Yi Liangqiu looked at Xiaoxin, who was sitting there obediently, with a touch of warmth in her eyes. I've always wanted a daughter, but it might not be possible in this lifetime. Because Qin Anlin wouldn't give her another chance. That day, he had crazily done it with her 5 times, and each time, he didn't really give it to her. She couldn't get pregnant. Of course, in this situation, she wouldn't deliberately want a child to tie him down. It was enough to be stupid once. Pei Chi pursed her lips and didn't know what to say. Yi Liangqiu seemed to want to say something to her. Sure enough, Yi Liangqiu opened her mouth and said softly, "Can we have a chat at the door?" Pei Chi looked at Xiaoxin, then at the Empress Yi, and hesitated for a moment before nodding. However, she was still willing to stand at the door, unwilling to leave Xiaoxin, afraid that something might happen. However, Xiaoxin was about to cry, because Little older brother's eyes suddenly became especially bright, and he wanted to eat Xiaoxin again. The only thing missing was a knife and fork in his hand. Xiaoxin pouted and cried softly, "Xiaoxin, it doesn't taste good." His voice was soft, afraid that the adults outside would hear him. Yi Muyun looked at the crying little bun. Originally, he hated little girls crying the most, but at this moment, he felt that this little bun crying was quite interesting. Therefore, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He was quite happy. This was extremely rare for Yi Muyun. It was rare for him to be this happy. Most of the time, he was so calm that he didn't seem like a 7-year-old child. Xiaoxin was the first toy in his life. Delicious and fun. When you grow up, you'll be even more delicious and fun. As the door was closed, Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. Xiaoxin is very cute. Just as Pei Qiqi was about to speak, she saw the hickey on Yi Liangqiu's neck. It looked quite forceful and intense, and she was sure that it wasn't there yesterday. Yi Liangqiu also felt her gaze, which was like that of a little wolf puppy. She reached out and touched it. Pei Qiqi, there are many types of kisses, and this is a punishment. Her voice lowered, as if she was melancholy. A punishment for giving him a disgraceful past. Chapter 1134. Because of Mu Yun's existence, his situation had also become difficult to deal with. She thought to herself, he must hate me. If he hates me, then so be it. If he doesn't love me, then hate me. Suddenly, Pei Qiqi felt a little sad and troubled. She wanted to divorce Anlin so that they could be together. But Anlin did not agree to it. She could not bear to be so cruel to him. After a long time, she said softly, "I'll talk to Anlin." "Yi Liangqiu, you're not in the wrong." What was in the wrong was fate. Just like her and Tang Yu, they had missed each other. After Pei Qiqi said that, she smiled gently at Yi Liangqiu. Her smile was sincere, without any pretense. Yi Liangqiu seemed to have fallen for Pei Qiqi at that moment. Perhaps that was how Qin Anlin liked her as well. Pei Qiqi coughed out gently before saying, "The truth is, we can be really good friends. But the prerequisite is that you're willing to give me your autograph." "Yeah, I'm your loyal fan." She leaned closer to Yi Liangqiu. "There's nothing going on between me and Anlin." She blinked her eyes again before her gaze landed on Yi Liangqiu's neck. The teasing look in her eyes was extremely obvious. Yi Liangqiu was stunned for a moment. She had not expected this to be the case. Given Qin Anlin's beastly nature, how could there be nothing going on between him and Pei Qiqi? Perhaps because she was feeling uneasy, Yi Liangqiu said softly, "Tomorrow's interview as usual." Pei Qiqi looked in the direction of the door. "What about Mu Yun?" "I'll find someone to take care of him," Yi Liangqiu said. She seemed to have triggered something and didn't say anything else. Pei Qiqi could feel that Yi Liangqiu was keeping a distance from her. She could understand. After all, their relationship was delicate. If they were too close, Yi Liangqiu would feel uncomfortable, especially during her marriage with Anlin. At this moment, Pei Qiqi felt that she must immediately dissolve the marriage with Qin Anlin, not for Yi Liangqiu, but for Anlin. She had a feeling that Yi Liangqiu loved Qin Anlin deeply. Yi Liangqiu pushed open the door to the ward and looked at her son in surprise. His eyes were shining as he looked at Pei Qiqi's little heart with a fervent gaze. This was something that had never happened before. Mu Yun did not pay much attention to little girls. On the other hand, Xiaoxin was about to cry. She stopped eating the dessert and looked at Yi Muyun warily. "Xiaoxin, don't be eaten." When she saw Pei Qiqi, Xiaoxin pounced on her and buried her face in Pei Qiqi's arms. She whimpered, "Xiaoxin, don't be eaten." The smile on Yi Muyun's face became more obvious. This little bun was not stupid. She actually knew that he wanted to eat her. Since she was called Xiaoxin, then he would eat Xiaoxin. Where should he start? Her eyes were very black and beautiful. Her little nose was straight and her little mouth was red and moist like jelly. She must be delicious. His gaze was fervent, and Xiaoxin cried even more miserably. She howled, "He wants to eat Xiaoxin." Pei Chi smiled and hugged the little girl in her arms. At this moment, Xiaoxin's dependence on him was so obvious. If they were not related by blood, how could she be like this? Her heart softened a little. She hugged the little girl in her arms and comforted, "How can that be? Brother Mu Yun won't eat Xiaoxin. If she is willing." Yi Muyun said softly and in a very gentlemanly tone, "I will eat her if she agrees." Pei Chi was stunned. Yi Liangqiu was also stunned. How old was he? He already knew how to flirt with girls. Moreover, Mu Yun did not know what it meant to eat her, right? Chapter 1135. At this moment, Yi Muyun got down from the bed and slowly walked to Xiaoxin's side. He lowered his head and gently nibbled on Xiaoxin's little nose. He was extremely daring. Pei Chi was still there. Xiaoxin was scared to tears. Was little big brother eating her? Does it hurt? Yi Muyun's voice was very low. If it hurts, I won't eat you. Xiaoxin shook her head, her face blank. Was that considered eating just now? It didn't seem to hurt. Yi Muyun pursed his lips and reminisced for a while. Then, his expression was a little indifferent. Milk buns. The taste of milk buns. He didn't like sweets, but from now on, he would like them. Xiaoxin's milky yellow tasted hard. Xiaoxin's eyes were filled with cat pee and tears. She looked really cute. Yi Muyun kissed her little face again. Baby, don't cry. I won't eat you anymore. Even if he wanted to eat her, he would wait until she grew up. Xiaoxin forgot to cry and just looked at him. She felt that this little big brother looked really good when he smiled. Xiaoxin twitched and held back her tears. Her voice was very soft. Little big brother, can I eat you too? Xiaoxin suddenly felt that little big brother looked very tasty. She mimicked Yi Muyun and nibbled on his straight nose. As she nibbled, she was worried that he would bite back. That careful look of hers was really cute. Yi Muyun smiled lightly and Xiaoxin forgot to cry. Pei Chi and Yi Liangqiu were stunned. This child's marriage was decided just like that. The adults' matters had not been resolved yet, and this child's matter was already decided. This world was a mess and a fantasy. Yi Liangqiu was also a little helpless. Mu Yun was quite serious. Thinking of the future, Pei Chi took her leave. Since her little heart didn't understand, it was better to pretend that she didn't know. Yi Muyun would probably forget it when he grew up. After all, he was still young. But when she thought of Yi Muyun's expression at that time, she sighed in her heart. It wasn't that simple. Yi Muyun's eyes were especially firm. He didn't look like a 7-year-old at all. Pei Chi drove Xiaoxin to the city for dinner and specially brought her to eat desserts. She was actually a little reluctant to send her away, but she had to go to work tomorrow and couldn't take care of her. Fortunately, Tang Yu would be back the day after tomorrow. Pei Chi suddenly stopped. What was she thinking? She didn't want him to come back earlier. Xiaoxin happily dug into the ice cream, and then secretly peeked at Pei Chi, her small mouth full. Chi, are you thinking of Daddy? I'm not. Pei Chi lightly snorted. In order to punish her, she dug a big piece out of Xiaoxin's little cup. Xiaoxin looked at the empty cup and was stunned for a moment. After a while, Xiaoxin said pitifully, I saw Daddy kissing you and fighting with your vixen. Xiaoxin's voice wasn't soft, and everyone around them looked at Pei Chi. It would have been fine if she had called her mommy. When a child said it, an adult would at most laugh, but Xiaoxin was calling Chi. Moreover, Pei Chi looked quite young. Was that the little vixen of the child's daddy? Pei Chi naturally also noticed that the surrounding gazes were a little strange. She coughed lightly. Xiaoxin, you can't talk about daddy and mommy outside. Does Chi want to be Xiaoxin's mommy? Xiaoxin's narrow-mindedness was very playful. Chapter 1136. At this time, a waiter came over and put the dessert in front of Pei Chi. He snorted at Pei Chi to show his disdain. Another shameless little vixen who climbed into the bed of her male master. Pei Chi was stunned and stared at Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin burst into tears. Xiaoxin doesn't want someone else to be her mother. Act with all your might, act with all your might. The surrounding gazes became more and more accusatory. Pei Chi was really a little angry. She picked up Xiaoxin, paid the bill and left. Xiaoxin was carried away while looking at the dessert on the table reluctantly and cried even louder. Pei Chi carried the little girl to the car and put her in the children's chair. Xiaoxin looked at her. Chi. Pei Chi ignored her and walked to the driver's seat. She buckled the seatbelt and drove straight back to Xia City. On the way, Xiaoxin peed secretly from time to time but did not dare to make a sound. Pei Chi was really angry. Xiaoxin was very smart, but a child should not play such a joke with an adult. She ignored her until Xiaoxin really cried. Pei Chi ignored her even though she cried. When they arrived at Xia City, Pei Chi carried Xiaoxin in her arms gently but did not talk to her. Xiaoxin wiped her tears. Chi, you are being cold-blooded. Then what you did in the dessert shop just now is called verbal violence, Tang share. Pei Chi was angry. She did not want Xiaoxin to embarrass others with her cleverness. Moreover, she was a little sad. For Xiaoxin to say this, could it be that in her heart, she was not her mother? After all, they had been separated for so long and Xiaoxin did not remember her, so Xiaoxin did not think of her as her mother. She was sad, but she did not know who to talk to. After returning home, she had a faint headache. Xiaoxin saw that Chi did not say anything and was even sadder. But seeing that Chi was not feeling well, little Fatty ran to the bathroom with a small cup of water and sprinkled water on Pei Chi's forehead. Then she looked at Pei Chi. Xiaoxin was scared. She was afraid that she made Chi angry and Chi would ignore her in the future. Her big round eyes were filled with tears as she looked at Pei Chi pitifully. Pei Chi was sprayed with cold water. When she opened her eyes, she saw Xiaoxin's pouting eyes. Her heart was sour and sweet at the same time. She reached out to hug Xiaoxin. I'm fine. Xiaoxin wanted to cry, but she held it in. Her voice sounded pitiful. Mama is fine. She corrected her seriously. Pei Chi could not help but laugh. She knew that the little fellow actually cared about it, but she did not immediately comfort him. Instead, she remained indifferent. Sure enough, Xiaoxin's heart was always in a gloomy mood until she left Xia City. Lao Zhao teased her in the car for a long time without saying anything. Later, when they went to Lin Yun's place, he told her about it. Lin Yun asked him to go back first and she would comfort Xiaoxin. After all, Lin Yun had been Xiaoxin's mother for 2 years. She knew Xiaoxin's temper very well. She knew that she had a quarrel with Pei Chi. She could not help but laugh. This mother and daughter were quarreling like sisters. It was all Tang Yu's fault. He did not want his wife to be his wife and raised her like a daughter. Therefore, his wife was delicate and Xiaoxin was even more delicate. Chapter 1137. Lin Yun found it funny. What's going on? Our Xiaoxin is so cute. How could she ignore her? Xiaoxin twitched and finally said, I said that Chi-Chi isn't my mother, so Chi-Chi got angry. Lin Yun thought that Xiaoxin must have hurt Pei Chi-Chi's heart. Otherwise, why would an adult argue with a child? But she was a grandmother and Xiaoxin had always been her big sister. How could she bear to scold her granddaughter? She coaxed her, then let Daddy talk to Mommy. Mommy will forgive Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin was in Lin Yun's arms and peeked at her grandmother's face. Grandma was still loving. Xiaoxin twitched again and cried until her face was a mess. She looked like a little cat. That night, Lin Yun called Tang Yu to tell him about it. The mother and son chatted and found it funny. Lin Yun hadn't seen Chi-Chi yet, so she couldn't help scolding Tang Yu, aren't you living together? Why do you want Xiaoxin to call you sister? Tang Yu heard his mother's words and his heart softened. He smiled and said, Mom, Chi-Chi, although it was a little difficult to talk about it, Tang Yu and his mother had almost nothing to hide. Chi-Chi has lost her memory for the past 2 years and her personality has changed a lot. She's not as mature as she was when we met when she was 20. Lin Yun thought about the 20-year-old Pei Chi-Chi and then thought about how she wasn't even 20. She was stunned. If that was the case, didn't that mean that she had 2 granddaughters? Lin Yun coughed lightly, Tang Yu, it's been hard on you. Tang Yu smiled and said, Yes, Mom. I'll coax her later. Lin Yun laughed and scolded, You're the only one who treats her like this. Tang Yu didn't care about others. Tang Yu was going to hang up. Hearing his mother's words, he sighed helplessly. Mom, fortunately, there is only one Pei Chi-Chi in the world. Lin Yun was fed a mouthful of dog food by her son. When she looked up, she saw Zhao Yi walk out of the bathroom wearing only a bathrobe. As soon as he walked over, he turned off the bedside lamp. The bedroom was dark. This was a habit that Zhao Yi would only have if he wanted to live as a couple. Sure enough, Zhao Yi came over and hugged Lin Yun from behind. His voice was a little hoarse. Are you done? He grabbed the phone and chatted casually with Tang Yu. The last thing he said was, Tang Yu, Yun Yun and I are going to bed. See you the day after tomorrow. Zhao Yi was still the vice president of Boyi and had a high position of power. It was very natural for him to talk about such a personal topic. Tang Yu felt like he was being fed dog food, while Lin Yun was extremely embarrassed. She pushed Zhao Yi away and snatched the phone. Tang Yu, if you have something to say, continue. Your uncle Zhao drank too much. I drank too much. Zhao Yi smiled and sat up from the bed. He hugged his wife's delicate body from behind and kissed her neck. His voice was a little seductive. When you're drunk, you can't do anything too excessive, right? Lin Yun closed her eyes. Zhao Yi. The phone was not hung up. If he did this, Tang Yu would know. Do you want us to continue after hanging up, or do you want Tang Yu to listen? Zhao Yi was usually serious, but now he was especially shameless. Lin Yun closed her eyes and touched the phone on the bed. She picked it up and looked at it. Sure enough, Tang Yu did not hang up. Lin Yun was cursing in her heart. She also thought that men were all bad things. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.